Welcome to Off the Coast, where we examine the views from Vancouver Island with your host, Rosemary Barnes. New and exciting things, preserved and respected things, business, recreation, politics, travel, all from the point of view of the people living and working on the island. Rosemary is a professional speaker and certified speaking coach living in historic Ladysmith and loving every day of the island life. Here is your Vancouver Island host, Rosemary.
Hello and welcome to Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island. I'm your host, Rosemary Barnes, the Maverick voice at Confident Stages. Joining me today is the one-of-a-kind and truly inimitable Jenn Hautby Ferguson. Jenn is a woman of rare and exceptional talents. She has reached this extraordinary balance of executive-level experience in hotels and event planning and destination marketing, and she combines all that with a passion for learning and sharing. She's got more letters behind her name than can possibly fit on a business card, and I don't even know what most of them means. She'll tell us about that in just a little while. One of the other things that Jenn is an expert on, and people listen to every word of wisdom that drips from her lips, is on emergency preparedness. Now, in the world, there are lots of ways to prepare for natural emergencies. Here on Vancouver Island, of course, the big one is the big one that happens anywhere along the fault lines, and that's for earthquakes. That also triggers emergency preparedness for tsunamis and other sorts of that thing. And Jenn knows all about all of this. Please welcome Jenn to the show. Jenn, it's so great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Rosemary, for that awesome introduction. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And of course, super excited to be talking about emergency preparedness.
It's
everyone's
one of your
favorite topic.
Well, you know, it's a love-hate relationship with this one, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And I hear that very consistently. People say to me quite regularly, my gosh, Jenn, seriously, you've been harassing me now about getting ready. Okay, I'm finally going to do it. So I'm hopeful that today that we inspire some folks to be ready, or to at least take those initial steps.
There's the deal. I want you to please explain for me what a CMP, CMM, MATM, and a ATV telephone HP connector.
It's like the alphabet.
It is the ABCs of Jenn.
Of Jenn. Okay. Well,
can you explain to us, please, what it is you do, how you got educated to do it, and wrap it up in something that my poor little brain can understand?
Absolutely. So the CMP and CMM, what we would call designations in the meeting and event planning world, really those are specific to the meetings and event industry. And that's really, I would say, I've spent the bulk of my career really in hospitality and tourism. And so for me, those were designations that I would suggest were industry standards. And ironically, now I've been helping to develop some of the curriculum related to emergency preparedness. Risk management is sort of how the broader public sometimes thinks about those types of things, is from a risk management perspective. And so just having the opportunity to give back to my industry, the meeting and event and tourism hospitality industries. The MATM is more recent. That stands for Master of Arts in Tourism Management. And I completed that master's degree last fall. And my specific focus for my thesis was basically disaster management as it relates to the tourism industry. And I specifically focused on a Vancouver Island context for my research. So it was, are we prepared? How are we prepared? How are we educating industry? And that really has, I would say, amplified my desire to help people be ready and to help them communicate effectively during times of disaster or crisis or challenge.
Wow. Well said. Well said.
Thank you.
And now I can understand that. This work is, I know you're centered on Vancouver Island, and we are grateful that you are here and helping us all. But really, the whole Pacific Northwest is sort of viewing you as someone very important to listen to in this regard, are they not?
Definitely. I mean, well, I don't know about that. I mean, certainly I'm not, I'm not an expert in every aspect of emergency preparedness, nor should I claim to be. I believe that we operate on a bit of a continuum, and we have the opportunity to learn. And certainly I've been doing a lot of that over the last 2 or 3 years specifically. Now at the Justice Institute and taking some additional certification and additional courses. But I've spent a lot of time touring, if you will, the Pacific Northwest and speaking very specifically on this topic. And primarily it's been to meeting and event folks, the tourism industry, of course. And it's relevant to everyone right now. When we think about emergency preparedness, I think in the Pacific Northwest and certainly on the island, we immediately go to, oh, we're going to have an earthquake, or there's going to be some sort of seismic event, whether it's a tsunami, etc. And we think that's the emergency that we need to prepare for. And I will submit to the listeners here that's not the only one that we should be considering, that there's lots of other earthquakes or emergency type situations. We just need to look at Fort McMurray most recently and how significant that event was to the community. And there was a significant impact, not just to the city per se, but to many other businesses in many other regions around the country and North America when we think about the impact to oil industry. So this is really relevant for a broad group of people. And I'll suggest today that I'm going to give you some other examples of things that folks should potentially be prepared for, in addition to a seismic event.
It all boils down to, we think we're in charge. Mama Nature is not to be messed with.
Absolutely.
It is really humbling to know that for all our advanced technology and whatnot, one natural event, a fire, a flood, and the communication systems are gone. Mm-hmm. And the ability to relocate, there are so many things that go crashing down that we take for granted.
You are 100% right, Rosemary. And I'll give your listeners a couple of quick examples of some times where that has been the case. And I think people are always surprised at how long it takes for what we would call critical infrastructure to be restored: hydro, power, gas. Those are the things, cellular communications, those are the things that we rely on really significantly. And if I look at recent events, so for example, Calgary, where we had that significant flood, and actually it was just 3 years ago, if you can believe it.
Oh my goodness.
It's amazing how 3 years have just flown by, but it was June 20th of 2013. And when that flood took place, and at the time I was with Tourism Nanaimo, and we were getting ready to head off to Calgary because WestJet was starting service between Nanaimo and Calgary, and we were going to be there to help support our partners at WestJet. And the flood happened, and things changed extremely rapidly. And they were changing so rapidly that it was difficult for us to even understand and ascertain, like, what areas were going to be in the inundation zone, what areas were going to have an immediate impact. Was our hotel affected? Could we still fly into Calgary? What did that look like? And it really, I would say, solidified for me this direction from a master's perspective in terms of, wow, there is a significant impact. And here I am in this situation as the visitor. I know a little bit about the Calgary community. I've visited before. I know the downtown core, but I don't know all the ins and outs of what does that mean when you say it's going to be closed off to 7th Street? What does that really mean? When you say I can't use this bridge and this bridge and this bridge, what does that mean from a visitor perspective? I don't even know what those bridges are called. I just go where my GPS tells me.
That's
so those
right,
are the
yes.
types of things we have to be thinking about. I'll suggest as well, Fort McMurray, they had the opportunity where, that fire was so rapid. Things were coming down quickly. They lost power. Obviously, it was extremely fluid and very rapid and extremely dangerous situation. But that emergency program had the foresight and the ability to deploy additional satellite communication, or additional cellular communication, portable cellular communication that were used in camps. So
yes,
they had the opportunity to really, I'll say, bolster their infrastructure and allow stability of the communication structure. And that is not something that sometimes, in most cases, can be quickly deployed. So just to give, folks an understanding of, how far reaching and why we need to prepare, why we need to think about it in advance.
Well, and that Fort McMurray fire isn't out.
No, it's not. No,
and
go ahead.
It's still, it's headed towards Saskatchewan now.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the amount of loss, the devastating amount of loss to people, their homes, their livelihoods.
It's massive. It's absolutely massive.
Yes. And that's just in our little corner of the world here.
Mm-hmm.
Around the globe, these disasters affect us. Mm-hmm. When we've got man-made disasters, and for example, oil spills and whatnot, whether that happens on our shores or someone else's, it's huge.
Absolutely. There is such a tremendous impact. And I think often we don't think about that ripple effect. And I used, just a few weeks ago, I was speaking in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and had the opportunity to chat with a group, and we were based in Grand Rapids. So I gave them some very specific Michigan examples, and I challenged them that my first question was, what do you think, that your state government spent last year or what did these storm, because they had a really significant storm last year. Yes. And the power was out for between 3 and 5 days, or 3 and 7 days, depending on what region folks were in. And I asked the question, and I got, 5 million, 10 million. And I was like, it's significantly more than that. It was $165 million impact. And the one storm which was significant, they had a significant flooding event. It knocked out power, and some places were out for up to 7 days. The impact of that storm alone was like 95 million. So of their entire annual budget, one storm, the impact was like $95 million. So, and that's one small area. When we replicate that to looking at Fort McMurray and shutting down businesses, 92,000 people are displaced. We're shutting down oil camps. That impact alone to the Canadian economy. Then you look at insurance and the insurance folks needing to step in addition to all of the other support services. The impact is really significant.
Now, I'm just thinking about something that you just said about in Michigan. The power was out for 7 days, which meant a great many things. So having the power out for 7 days, I'll just bet you that there's a whole lot more things than immediately come to mind as repercussion from having no power for 7 days. Mm-hmm. Care to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So I think this is where we come into that conversation about most government agencies will have the notion of you must be prepared for 72 hours. And we're going to come to why government says that and what their role is. But I think when we think about power outage for 72 hours is about the time frame. If you think about Hurricane Katrina as an example, when you think about being without power for 72 hours, most people can get through 2 or 3 days. It's kind of like going camping for the weekend. You suck it up, you use the barbecue. We're fortunate that this particular Michigan event, for example, took place in the summer. So the temperature was reasonably warm. But if you think about the ice storm in Quebec that knocked out power to some regions for 7 to 14, in some cases 21 days, being without power for a sustained period of time brings with it a whole host of other issues. So you may be using gas then as a heat source. Then we have carbon monoxide issues, or you're trying to do wood burning in your stove, but perhaps the ventilation system isn't working, or the electric fan that pushes the heat into your home isn't working. Right. Most people can sort of manage for about 72 hours. By the time we get to that 72-hour mark, that's where we start to see an increase in violence, an increase in, for example, looting, or just the level of frustration. People are pretty patient for about 72 hours. And at that point, things start to escalate. So we see those secondary issues starting to come into effect then. The inability to be warm, needing to check on people, the inability, electricity, food spoilage is a significant issue. So there starts to become secondary issues for sure.
Yes. Not the least of which is medical supplies.
Absolutely. And if we look at, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, consider a diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, or medications that have to be kept cool,
Mm-hmm.
or medications that have to be kept at room temperature. And you're in Quebec following an ice storm in winter in Canada.
Exactly. Exactly. It's significant, and I think people often don't think far enough ahead. I mean, I think I've been reading some research lately because I'm a kind of a research nerd, and the research says, that we human nature is to kind of, you don't want to go there. We don't want to think about the things that are going to be uncomfortable or difficult, or where we're thinking about disasters, we're thinking about the impact to our family. People just kind of want to put their head in the sand and not really engage. And the unfortunate part, or I'll say the opportunity there, is the more we prepare, the more ready we are, as in having a plan at home, having a kit at home. We know where the blankets are. We can pull together, our camping supplies, for example, if we had to evacuate our home. The more prepared you are and the more opportunity you have to test it, the more ready and resilient people become. So they know what to expect, so we look at that with fire drills in schools with kids. That's the thing that comes to mind right away, is as kids, we teach our kids, and on the West Coast, we do earthquake drills as well, where the kids get under their desk. And we do fire drills, or we practice evacuating the building. Well, that's relevant in many, many, many situations. It's relevant, and in a situation where we have an active shooter. Maybe you do a shelter in place. What does that mean? If we had a situation where there was a large wildfire or some sort of impact to the building where we needed to evacuate, a fire drill protocol serves to safely and effectively evacuate. And because the kids have practiced, they know what to expect. They know where to go, and they know what to do.
Yes. And I don't know if it was the same for you in school. I went to school in Alberta. We were taught every year, the fire marshals would come in and send us home to teach our parents how to do a fire drill at home. And I went to school for a lot of years, and I have to tell you, we never practiced one at home.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout my whole life, people weren't taking this seriously. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, I was in the middle of the prairies where the chances of flooding was sort of minimal, and the chances of earthquake was even more so. And nobody was going to get bit by a parade of snakes or locusts. And there was, the possibility for natural disaster is much less than it is on the coast or on a fault line, or, in tropical places. Or now the biggest thing that we would have had would be fires, especially in the middle of winter. Mm-hmm. But you're right. People don't take it seriously. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, I have been on Vancouver for 3 years, and I have given sort of a nod and a hint in my head that I must get the emergency preparedness kit ready. But it's not.
But that's where it stops, right?
That's where it stops.
Of maybe I should do it, but
I really should get on that.
To action. You my friend, we need to get you sorted on that. There's lots of great online resources that can support people in those areas. Every local government agency will have an area on their website. So I know, for example, on the island, all of the regional districts, all of the municipalities have an emergency preparedness section, and it's really detailed. Usually they're very robust. They detail what should be in your emergency kit. What should you have in a grab and go kit? A grab and go kit is like a backpack, or usually people do a backpack or a box that you can have in your car, and it goes with you everywhere you go. So that's sort of from a fundamental perspective. There should be one in every vehicle that you own. You should have a pair, especially as a woman. I carry a pair of running shoes in my car. And that is really, in the event that we had a significant issue here, whatever that may be, fire, flood, you take your pick. I do not want to be wearing heels. I need to have proper running shoes on, because we're probably going to be faced with glass, falling debris. It would be the same thing if we had a landslide or any of those other sort of issues. And so having, a pair of running shoes and some basic supplies in your vehicle, you may need to go and pick up your kids somewhere. You may need to have 5 people in your car with you. So being prepared for those types of things, as well as at home, Many of us will hope that if a serious situation happens, we happen to be at home, but we certainly saw in the case of Fort McMurray, that wasn't the case. And people were told it was not safe for them to go home. So they had to make other arrangements. And that's where having those meeting points with your family are critically important. Where are we going to meet? And we're just going to plan to go there. And if you had to leave town and you didn't have all your family together, can you imagine that? And that's what Fort McMurray went through. Like it would be the worst feeling ever, but not having a plan is worse. And throwing things in a bag at the last minute is not a plan.
No.
So,
it really
if
isn't.
you have your kit, I talked to a very good friend of mine in Kelowna who during the fires in 2003, her family was impacted. Fortunately, their home was spared, but it was extremely touch and go. The homes all around them burned to the ground. And what she said to me, I said, Nancy, how did you cope with that? And I said, how did you decide what to take? And she said, Jen, I looked around and I thought, everything that's important to me is in my car. My dog was there. My kids were there. My husband was there. I grabbed the emergency kit that had copies of all of our documents. I put it in the trunk and we drove away. And I thought, holy cow. But looking back, that's exactly what she should have done.
Yes.
They were ready and they were able to mobilize quickly because they had a plan and they were ready.
So I would like to delve into the 72 hours versus 1 week.
Yes. Okay. So
the government's plans are always for 72 hours.
They are.
Can you please share why that's good and how it could be better?
Absolutely. So I think, having a basic assumption that, you could be theoretically without service, let's say hydro, gas, take your pick, for 72 hours, because on the coast, we get windstorms all the time. Back east, you'll get thunderstorms that are severe, take down power lines, and it does take time to restore those things. 72 hours, I think I will suggest is a basic minimum. That is the bare minimum. If you ask most people in emergency management how big their supply is, how many days could they go with the supply that they have, almost all of us will say 14 days to 30 days. I will tell you, we are ready for 14 days in my house and probably could stretch that to 21 days if necessary. If I look at, some of the situations that have unfolded recently, and I'll give you one example, the volcano in Iceland that grounded air transfers around the world, or Hurricane Katrina, where people were still on their rooftops after 72 hours or 96 hours and were still being recovered. There was significant damage. If we had a situation on Vancouver Island, for example, where the west side of the island was cut off because we have one road access in and out,
yes.
If there was a landslide on Highway 4, forget the seismic events, if there was a landslide on Highway 4, that would impact our ability to move goods and services into that region. On Vancouver Island, no matter where you are, there is never more than a 3-day supply of anything.
Yes.
That's relevant for most communities north of the U.S. border. Most stores don't have more than about a 72-hour supply of anything. So when we're without power for a sustained period of time, you're not going to be able to just run down to the superstore and pick up, milk or whatever it is that you need. All of that food will be spoiled and it's going to have to be restocked, and that is a process. So that having provisions for a week or 2 weeks, I will suggest is critically important. And there is the ability to, I don't want folks to think all they have to buy is canned food and then, we should be checking those kits every 6 months or so. But there are online resources where they're built like rations. So, for example, what the military would get when they're out in the road. This is something that you are not going to eat on a regular basis. But if you had to, in the event of an emergency, you could feed your family and it doesn't spoil for 5 to 10 years. So depending on the brand that you choose. So it's there if you need it. And if after 10 years you don't need it, it's your insurance policy.
Where do you get the rations like that? Are those on the websites too?
They are available on some of the websites. So one example is earthquakekit.ca. They have terrific resources. And while the name Earthquake Kit implies earthquakes only, it is absolutely not. They have exceptional resources just for emergency supplies. And you can put together your own kit, or you can build your own, like you can build your own kit, or you can purchase something ready-made. Lots of stores have some kits that are ready-made as well. Certainly a comprehensive first aid kit. But people also need to think about their pets. And often we forget that, we have to have emergency provisions for our pets. We need to have emergency provisions for every member of our family. We need to have provisions for if you take medication. If you're like me, prone to getting allergies, well, I have allergy medication in my kit to make sure that if it happened during the summer, I'd be able to breathe. A water
That would be good.
purification
Yes.
tablet, that sort of thing.
So what about what do you suggest people do for medications that have to be, kept cool? Or what do you suggest people do? Should they have ice packs in the freezer? That's not going to last for a week.
No.
What do you do with that sort of thing?
That's a great question. And I would say it's one of those situations where you may have to make a judgment call. And at the last minute, that would be something you'd be grabbing out of your fridge and, grabbing, frozen peas or something out of the freezer to help keep it cool in the short term. And then you're going to be looking for an opportunity. So in the case of Fort McMurray, people who were diabetic, if they were able to grab their medication, they'd put it in the car with them and off they went to Edmonton or some point south. And once they got to Edmonton, they were able to receive an emergency prescription. So they were able to be facilitated in that way. If we were in a situation where we were without we were without power, for example, in a broad scale, we would have to be looking at, you just would have to take it with you. That would really be your only option. And just hope that there was a priority list, which typically in emergency there would be, and that we would be able to service those folks that needed that support. But it's a bit of having a plan, knowing exactly where that medication is. If Rosemary, you weren't at home, your husband or your partner would be able to grab that and know that it was a priority and it had to go with whoever was at home. And if you weren't at home,
and you can't do that without a plan.
That's right. Exactly. So there has to have been a discussion and maybe it's a note on top of the emergency box. Grab the medication out of the fridge, take the insulin or whatever it may be. Just because in that moment, it's not going to be top of mind and you need that visual, maybe reminder that says, make sure you take it with you. I think
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say,
Okay. That's funny. You talk, I'll listen.
I was going to say the only other thing that I really strongly encourage folks to ensure is in their emergency kit, besides the pet preparation, of course, in addition to family, is making sure you have cash in your emergency kit. So, a couple $100, it won't be a huge impact in terms of your day-to-day life, but it will be a huge impact in terms of your ability to get gasoline on the road when debit systems, et cetera, are down. Cash is king.
That's true. What a temptation, though, to know that there's cash in the emergency kit. But you're right. I wouldn't have thought of cash.
Mm-hmm.
But
in this age of electronic communication, it's sort of not. It's not the thing. I never carry cash in my wallet. I carry a debit card. But when the systems are down, we're going to need that. We're going to need that cash to be able to get out of town, if you will.
It's to get out of Dodge. It's very true. Just walk into a store if the debit machine is down.
Exactly.
And see the surly people just absolutely irate.
Exactly.
That they can't
and
get
they have
what
to
they
put a
want
sign. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. They have to put up signs at the door, and people standing there. We are so reliant on these things. So that brings me to my next question, which is communication. Now, during an emergency, you can't expect that the cell phone's going to work. You can't expect that you're going to be able to turn on the radio because there's no electricity. Mm-hmm. So what do you suggest people do for communications? We're a little bit past smoke signals, but not much.
Maybe not much. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we talk to me about how we're supposed to communicate with each other in times of emergency?
That's a great question. And I think it will really depend on the situation, but it's safe to say that we're not going to be able to rely on cellular communication. So the important thing again is, of course, I'm going to say it again, have a plan. And so for me and my family, having an out of province contact is important. So we obviously live on Vancouver Island. I have family in Ontario. So our plan is to call and check in with my mom. My mom then can let everybody know we're fine, we're okay, and where we are. And that gives us the opportunity that if we had to leave quickly, it's more likely that we would be able to reach out to family in Ontario than we would possibly be able to reach out to family, say, in Victoria. So, having a bit of a plan in terms of what that looks like and who's making the call and when are we calling and that sort of thing is important. The other is having a hand crank radio or a solar powered radio. And those are very readily available. You can buy them at pretty well any hardware store. So for example, Canadian Tire, Home Depot, online, Amazon, all of those folks, Lowe's, they all sell them a variation, and you can buy really skookum ones, but the basic set or basic version comes about $35. It's not particularly cumbersome, but it allows for you to charge your cell phone, and it allows for you to hear, obviously, radio emergency broadcast systems. So radio does have emergency broadcast systems, both for AM and for FM, usually broadcast through FM. On the island, for example, we're one of the only destinations in Canada where we actually have a hardwired connection between our emergency operations at the city of Nanaimo and the radio station here in town. And that allows for broadcast throughout the island. So very quick access to emergency provisions, emergency service, and emergency information, but that will come through radio.
There are a few people that still hobby in ham radio.
Yes.
They are perhaps not as silly and uninformed as we might think. I mean, ham radio will work, right?
Absolutely. And I will suggest to you that they are part of for example, most municipalities have hand radio operators that are part of their emergency service plan, believe it or not. Certainly on the island, we see that. And there's a very active group here. And that will be a lifeline in an emergency. I will suggest for your listeners as well, here we are chatting virtually, which I think is so awesome. And
Isn't
technology it is. And technology is an amazing thing, and it has given us such opportunity. But I will tell you, in my house, I still have an old school phone. I have an old phone that would allow me to physically plug into the wall, and I have not gone straight to cellular. And the reason for that is because in an emergency, I know my cell phone's not going to work. I lived through the blackout in 2004 in Ontario before I moved west. And, I was 5 days without power. The entire eastern seaboard was without power. And it took days and days for it to come back in. And even when it did, we were on rolling blackouts and things were surging and you had to throw everything out in your fridge. So that's an example of sort of a not particularly, what I'll say, dramatic disaster, but it became a disaster because after 72 hours, nothing, no food was available. You still had no power. We didn't have the ability to communicate. Gas stations were running out of gas. So it became its own sort of self-propelling disaster because things were escalating. So that's a time when cellular communication didn't work.
Of course.
It was gone.
It concerns me.
Having that old school phone allowed me to stay connected to people.
It concerns me a great deal that landlines, telephone booths, are removed.
Yes.
It is extremely difficult to find a telephone booth with a phone in it. They've been removed. Mm-hmm. So for the person on the street whose cell is down, they can't go to the telephone booth and make a landline call.
No, they can't.
It doesn't strike me as yeah, it strikes me as not being particularly wise.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think telecommunication companies, and I mean that without disrespect to them, of course, it's telecommunication companies are looking at what's efficient and how are they're looking at it from the consumer perspective. How are their consumers communicating? How are what's relevant to them? And in that particular case, obviously, phone booths have sort of gone the way of other sort of quote unquote dinosaur technology, but I think there's still a place for those hardwired connections. Having said that, in Fort McMurray, like I said, what we saw was portable cellular towers being brought in and the ability to reinforce that infrastructure just to get folks out safely. And I think that there's a place for that. So again, that becomes part of a broader, more regional in scope emergency planning process. And government has that included in their plan in many cases.
So is there in government an emergency preparedness department? Who takes care of it?
That particular piece, or just in general?
In general.
In general, yes, there are, and I would say communications is a massive component of what happens in an emergency planning department. And yes, so the way that the emergency management system, if you will, works in Canada is under the Emergency Services Act. There is it's federally, I'll say, regulated, incorporated, and each province is primarily responsible for the things that happen in each of their provinces. They then download authority to what we would call local authority, which is generally local or municipal government. Sometimes it's a regional district, sometimes it's a First Nations government, and it sort of depends on the particular situation. But for example, in BC, we have Emergency Management BC, or EMBC. They in turn download authority and require by law. So there is legislative and both legislation and policy that require governments, local governments, to have an emergency plan, to exercise that emergency plan, and that it's reasonably all encompassing. Similarly, local government, so then the city of Nanaimo, the regional district of Nanaimo, would have the provision then to engage. They also would have their own plans and would have the provision to engage others. So, and procure services where necessary, and those agreements would be existing and in place. So, for example, the BC Wildfire Service, or what we would call Coastal Fire Service, they have agreements in place and protocols in place as to how to engage and basically how to ask for help. So in the case of Fort McMurray, the request, went up through the grapevine. We had the city of Fort McMurray, or the municipality of Wood Buffalo, that was responsible for the disaster. They asked for help from the province of Alberta. The province of Alberta then asked for assistance from the federal government. And by declaring a state of emergency locally and then provincially, that allows you to access, sort of level up in terms of access to funds and to resources. So in the case of Fort McMurray, that allowed the province of Alberta, once they declared a state of emergency, to then allow the military to come in and provide some fire suppression support.
There was on the web today, on Facebook, there was a story of some of the Fort McMurray residents being allowed back home. Mm-hmm. And it brought tears to my eyes, because the firefighters and the RCMP were lined up to welcome the people back home. They were holding a Canadian flag.
Yeah,
to show. I mean, that is, human beings really do. For all that, we get the secondary effects of disasters, and we go to the looting and the short tempers and all the silly things that people do when they're in trauma and the like of that. But human beings really do tend to come to each other's aids when we need help. And
absolutely.
It sort of, just as I start thinking to myself, oh my goodness, as human beings, we are barely evolved out of the trees. When I see some of the ludicrous things that we are doing to each other and to our planet, and then we see Mother Nature rearing her head and putting us firmly back in our place, and you see the outpouring of support for people. Disasters have a bit of a silver lining.
They really do. And I think Canadians in particular, I can't tell you how many times internationally or from my friends from the US who have said, holy smokes, y'all are Canadian, a very classy bunch. And I think that's true. I think we have this inherent need to look after our neighbor. And, those first responders, those guys are the heroes here in this scenario. And then, how I bet they're real glad to see all those folks come back. I feel like it's
Yes.
a bit like we did our job here and they should be so proud of the work they did. And they're like, come on home. It's safe now.
Yes.
And, there's lots of folks that don't have the opportunity to return home. And I think everybody is aware of that. And so people are grateful to have the opportunity to have a home that's still standing, or at a minimum have the opportunity to go home. And I guess I would say that I think that's where that sort of integration and collaboration from a multi-level government perspective and an interagency perspective is so critical. And that's a piece that I think is continuing to evolve. It's not perfect in any scenario. It's not perfect, but I will suggest that fire, from the research that I've done, fire systems, fire organizations. So Alberta Fire Service, for example, on the coast, it's wildland fire management. It is exceptional in terms of the work that they do, the way that they integrate, the way that they leverage resources, the way that they request resources. It's phenomenal.
And yet, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, it disturbs me to a degree then that because Vancouver Island has so many very small communities, that the firefighters are run on a strictly volunteer basis.
In some cases, yes.
And that disturbs me so badly because in times of a car accident, a fire, someone having a heart attack, so anything that smacks of disaster and needing aid, it is always the firefighters that arrive first.
It is. You are 100% right. And I think, in this age of, I think volunteer firefighters, I think there's a place for that. I will suggest that both legislation and policy, and again, I'm going to default to that, allows for additional resources to come. Now, having said that, it takes time. So,
Yes.
in a disaster situation, sometimes we don't have the luxury of time. And this is where that default to the 72 hours, being prepared to be self-sustaining for 72 hours, is so critical at a minimum. If we had, for example, a really serious car accident, they know how to immediately go to triage, where they're, taking the most seriously injured and or those who can be helped the quickest. And just like you see in the hospital, they're identifying who has the most critical need. It's similar in terms of levels of disaster. Local authorities, so whether it's a local government or regional government, have the ability to ask for additional resources, and those resources are often offered before they're even requested. And we definitely saw that in Alberta. Do you need our help? Can we send people? How can we help you? And we see that time and time and time again. We certainly saw it in Calgary, where people were just, let me roll up my sleeves and I'm going to come in there and help you dig out the Saddle Dome so we can be ready for Stampede. So I think people are very willing to give. We certainly saw it in terms of the outpouring of support, financial support, donations, etc., that Fort McMurray and in turn the Red Cross were receiving. So I think people are willing to roll up their sleeves, but that ability to level up, that ability to say, I need help, and then to pull in the resources that are needed to provide support is important. But the piece to that I want to make sure that the listeners here today is that being ready, if you will, for 72 hours at a minimum is a huge component of that. We have a moral responsibility to prepare ourselves. And maybe that's the next piece here is, it's not local government's job to come in and make sure that you have enough food to eat. That's your job. And I mean that respectfully. It is our responsibility as parents, as citizens in this community. It is our job to know where the emergency locations are for emergency shelters. Where do we go? Do we have a plan to get out of town? Do we know where we need to go if we have to leave town? If you're traveling, have you identified where, how are you exiting the building? What's your escape plan? What's your route? Do you have phone numbers in your phone? So if you're traveling in Europe and you need to call what we would call 911 at home, what number do you call in the community that you're in if you are part of you've been in a car accident and your partner needs assistance? Who do you call? And having those numbers ready and in your phone, that's part of being prepared. That's part of our ownership, part of our buy-in to being prepared. That 72-hour time, sorry.
Well, it comes down to, are you willing to be a victim?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you going to take steps to make sure you're not?
And local government, I mean, very respectfully, they're as I said, their job is not to make sure you've got enough food and water. Their job is to rebuild and establish emergency passage for, critical infrastructure.
I know that you were first in tourism and hospitality. Your passion now, clearly, not quite the same as it was before. When you speak about these things, you're obviously very well researched, very well educated, and clearly it is a passion.
It is, for sure.
So what happened? And there's nothing. Oh, I wish people had more passion like that. What happened between hospitality and tourism? Was there an event? Was it a slow seepage of information that got your fire burning? What happened? Did you
It was all of the above. Honestly, it was all of the above. I will say that for me, there are a couple of pivotal moments for me in my career in hospitality. The first was 9/11, and I think we all probably can think back to where we were at that particular moment. And for me, I was working in a hotel property in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And the conference services manager came downstairs to my office in tears and said, "I need your help. You need to come with me." And I didn't know what I was walking into. And when I very quickly realized that the situation was that the meeting planner in that particular group had heard about 9/11, and that I had to go in and share with that entire group. So there's 256 people in the room. I needed to go in and tell the New York State Cemeteries Association that 9/11 had happened.
Oh my goodness.
And it was I will never, ever forget that moment. I will never forget it. It is clear as day where I had to share with these folks probably one of the most horrific experiences that they've ever had. 80% of their friends and family, 80% of them were from Manhattan.
Oh my
and
goodness.
therefore were directly impacted. It was a horrible feeling. It was a horrible feeling to deliver that news. And when I saw the impact, so the secondary piece to this was, of course, the human reaction, which is, what can we do for you? How can we support you? Let's figure out a way to get you home. Those types of kind of immediacy. But within a couple of days, it turned to, wow, there's going to be a significant impact to our business. We need to rethink our strategies about how we're recruiting. Are we ready? What would we do differently next time? As we debriefed, how did we support these guests? Was it the right decision? So that was sort of the first, I'll say, piece to the equation. And then beyond that, I've been involved in many situations. A big part of my work in tourism and hospitality has been on the marketing and communication side of things. So I'm constantly in sort of crisis communications drafting mode, and how are we going to respond to this, and what's our key messaging, and are we ready? And I ask that question on a regular basis, and it really got me thinking. As I spent a lot of time in this last year in Tofino, it really got me thinking, is the visitor ready? Does the visitor know what to do? So it very much, my work from an emergency preparedness really used a visitor lens, and really got me thinking, as a guest in a hotel or as a guest in a community, what would I do? And the more I dig in and the more I read and I look at, we don't have a plan, if you will, for visitors. And most provincial and municipal policy or documents don't actually identify the visitor. In fact, we have in BC gone so far as to turn people away if they are not from here. So we had a situation where there was a landslide in the Shuswap when the Mount Poly tailing pond had a breach. And we had people who were on houseboats. They came back to the car park area, which is only accessible by boat. They got off and their car was buried in 10 feet of mud and rock.
Oh, no.
When they went to the emergency evacuation center, they were told, "Oh, you're not welcome here because you don't live here." And they said, "We can't leave. Our car is under 10 feet of rock and there is no other road in or out. We're cut off at this point. What do you mean I'm not welcome here?" And they said, "Our policy is residents only."
Well,
so
no, that's no good. No.
Right. But nobody, because the plan hadn't been tested, nobody knew that was going to be an issue. So in BC, we've rectified that. Now there's a lot of language in some plans, not all plans, and it's not, this remains fluid, where we start to recognize, that's only a couple of years ago now, we're starting to recognize, hey, wait a second, there's a gap here. And when we look at communities, I use Tofino as an example, or Sun Peaks or Mount Tremblant as small communities where they are deemed to be resort communities where people congregate. Niagara Falls is another example, where you have a lot of people who would be descending on a particular area, let's say in the summertime at peak season, and you have a very small community. So Tofino, population 2,000 in the summer, that could easily be 20 or 25,000 people during the high season on any given day. Extremely quickly, we would overwhelm local resources. So that ability to draw in would be absolutely critical. But those agreements have to be in place.
Well, and here's the thing is that Tofino is an amazing place. I love it. But it is absolutely sitting, waiting. There are so many forces that could descend upon that idyllic little situation that could turn it into a disaster zone in the blink of an eye.
Well, and I think that's where the planning and integration comes in. Can I give you a quick quiz, Rosemary? Is that okay?
Sure. Oh, yes.
Here. Okay. So if I give you a choice of, well, now I'm probably misleading you, but where do you think in North America, I'm going to give you two questions. The first is, in North America, where do you think is the greatest area for seismic activity? Like what region?
Ooh, now is it the East Coast or the West Coast? I will go with the West Coast.
Okay. What if I told you it was Oklahoma? Does that
What?
shock you?
That kind of shocks me.
I'm 100% serious. Most people don't know that. Most people go immediately to San Andreas Fault, California, Pacific Northwest. That's sort of where they go to. It is, in fact, Oklahoma. And the spine of that fault actually goes basically like Tornado Alley. So from Oklahoma all the way north towards Michigan and Indiana.
Is it a coincidence that it's Tornado Alley?
Exactly.
And
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It is Tornado Alley / the greatest, most seismically active area in North America.
Why don't we know about this?
I don't know, but the area so when you think about the catastrophic effect, if we had a significant earthquake, and let's just say it was in Oklahoma City or somewhere north of there, the ripple effect would be massive, and the impact would be really significant. So those folks need to be ready. So I guess I use the situation like, yes, is it more probable that we would have an earthquake in the West Coast? Definitely, but it's likely not the only emergent situation that could take place. We could have a train derailment that could cause chaos. We could have a chemical spill or a plant that would explode that would cause chaos. So Those are the type. Being prepared has many, many, many facets.
Yes. The reason that I was talking about Tofino in particular was because it's on the wild and woolly Pacific Ocean. That's the side of the huge winter storms. That's the side of incredible beauty and incredible danger. The riptides themselves, right? Rogue waves. But it's also access. There's one way in and one way out. Mm-hmm. And if there was a disaster that was bad enough to cause a landslide to cut off the roads, then Tofino's in big trouble.
Yes.
On the other hand, it is also the place of such exquisite beauty that you're not going to stop people from going there. You're not going to stop people from living there because it is so incredible.
And those folks just need to be ready. And they do have emergency provisions. And they, Tofino Tofino and Ucluelet, to be very honest, have really amped up. They recognize that they weren't ready, and they have really amped up their emergency preparedness piece. Tofino, for example, just implemented another emergency response coordinator position. The engagement of the industry in Tofino is really good. It's coming along, I would say, more significantly than any other community that I've seen so far.
Yes.
And that aside maybe from Vancouver does a very good job as well. But when I look across the country and across North America, that level of engagement just isn't there. And mostly from a tourism perspective, because people don't want to say, if you come here, this might happen.
Instead of course not.
I also encourage people now to say things like when you go into, say, a movie theater, when you go into get onto the airplane, like look around you and just identify where are 2 or 3 emergency exits. How many, if you had to count the seats from you in the plane to the exit door on both sides, how many seats is it? Because you might not be able to see. So can you count the seats and then you'll know how to get out? So mentally doing those types of things just make you more comfortable and make you more prepared. So sharing information is empowering to the person receiving it. And I think that's how we have to frame it.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Are you comforted by your awareness of exits and strategies and your plan? Or does this create a heightened awareness in you that has you living in a constant state of fight and flight?
That's a great question. And the truth is I don't know that I don't know. I definitely feel like I am far more aware now than I ever was. And I will say that I feel like my family is ready. I feel like my home is ready. So that gives me a level of comfort that if something happened, we know what to do and where we're going to go. And we're reasonably prepared. I think that being more aware, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I do think it empowers me. So when I'm traveling, I'm really thinking about those types of things. That I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe it's both. Can I be both?
You can be anything you want to be. It's all but it is. I mean, this is the reason why people put their head in the sands.
It 100%.
This is the reason why, for example, in the middle of the prairies, like Oklahoma, nobody thinks about emergency preparedness because it's not in your face like it is in Tofino and Ucluelet.
But it should be.
I know it should be.
Yeah.
But you see, the reason Tofino and Ucluelet are so incredibly well prepared is that it's in your face possibility of danger.
Yes.
Now, on the other hand, Oklahoma has storm cellars for the tornadoes.
Right.
Now, we don't have storm cellars for tornadoes here. But there's a reason for us not wanting to live in this world of disaster planning, because that means it's on our mind all the time, and that's not a pleasant thing.
I feel like it's a little bit like, I feel like it's like having insurance for your house. You hope you never need it. And that's truly how I feel about emergency preparedness. I hope that I never, ever have the occasion to use my emergency kit. I know we're ready. I hope I never need it. It feels to me like it's an insurance policy. That's often what I equate it to. It's an insurance policy. And that awareness is an insurance policy. And it's a little bit like, sometimes you need to have difficult conversations. And I feel like this is one of those conversations that needs to be had. And it becomes a safety issue. At a primal level, it becomes a safety issue. And I think Fort McMurray highlighted that for a lot of people. We certainly saw, I've heard from my friends and family, I can tell you, I've had 6 different people who have in the last 30 days have said to me, or in the last couple of weeks have said to me, oh my gosh, Jen, I've got my emergency kit together.
Yes.
Thanks for inspiring me. Yes, I finally listened, because it scared them into, I need to be ready.
There was a very good, and we're just about out of time here, but there was an excellent opportunity in Nanaimo, where I happen to have been, about being ready at your place of business as well, because we're at work a lot of the time. We have our homes ready, but businesses have to be equally ready, because you may not be at home when the disaster hits. Chances are pretty good you're going to be at work. And you better have a plan within your own business, in your place of business as well. This is not just emergency personal 72 hours or family 72 hours. Businesses need to be taking care of their people too.
Absolutely. Business continuity is important.
Yes. Boy, is it ever. Because when we come to the infrastructure and getting people back up and working again, having your business prepared for this is is supremely important too, in my purely professional opinion. Jenn, we have come to the end of our show. I can't believe an hour has gone by. I could talk to you about this for days on end, and I'm so glad that we are in your very capable hands for making sure that we are prepared, or at least aware of the possibilities. You can't force us to get enough water for 72 hours, but you can certainly tell us the consequences of not. And I am very grateful.
Thank you. It was such fun to be here.
Thank you, Jenn. You are amazing and passionate and eloquent, and it has been absolutely a joy and an instructional joy to have you on the show this week. Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rosemary Barnes, the Maverick Voice at Confident Stages and the host of Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island, thanking you for joining us today. And I look forward to having you join me again next Wednesday, same time, same station on Bold Radio Station. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island, with host Rosemary Barnes. To book Rosemary as a speaker or speaking coach, or to offer suggestions of extraordinary guests for the show, please visit her website at www.confidentstages.com.